not a battlefield crown, not a warrior's reward seized from a fallen enemy in the mud. This one came on a velvet cushion carried by priests in the candle-lit silence of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on Christmas Day of the year 800. The man who knelt to receive it was the most powerful ruler in the Western world, a king who had spent 30 years turning the fractured inheritance of his father into something Europe had not seen since the legions left. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, in an age when most men barely reached 5. His hands had held a sword since childhood. His court called him Charles. History would call him something else. But the crown had a price that no one in that basilica was yet willing to say aloud. To understand Charlemagne, you must first understand the world he was born into and what it had lost. The Western Roman Empire had collapsed 3 centuries earlier, and in its absence, Europe had become a patchwork of tribal kingdoms, each one fighting the others for land and cattle and the right to call itself legitimate. The roads the Romans had built were crumbling. The cities were shrinking. The trade networks that had connected Britain to Egypt were fraying at every junction. What remained of organized civilization clung to the monasteries, islands of Latin literacy in a sea of illiterate violence, preserving what they could of a world that had already ended. Into this fractured landscape, the Franks had carved the largest kingdom in the West. Charlemagne's grandfather, Charles Martel, had stopped the Umayyad advance at Tours. His father, Pepin, had legitimized Frankish kingship through an alliance with the papacy that gave the church military protection and gave the Franks divine sanction. By the time Charles inherited the throne in 768, he had a foundation. What he did with it would take 30 years of almost uninterrupted war. The Saxons were first. They occupied the dense forests and river valleys of what is now northern Germany, a pagan people of fierce independence who had resisted Frankish expansion for generations and would resist it for 30 more years of grinding, brutal, inconclusive campaign. Charlemagne fought them every summer for 3 decades. He won battles, he destroyed villages, he built fortresses along the frontier, and every winter when his army went home, the Saxons rose again, melting back into their forests, dismantling what he had built, waiting for the next season. The war had a rhythm that neither side could break. Until Verdun. In 782, following a Saxon uprising that destroyed a Frankish army in the Teutoburg forest, the same ground where Germanic tribes had annihilated Roman legions 8 centuries earlier, Charlemagne made a decision that the chronicles record with a flatness that does not conceal its weight. 4,500 Saxon prisoners were brought to the banks of the river Aller. They were given a choice between baptism and death. The chronicles do not record how many chose baptism. They record that 4,500 men were executed in a single day. This was not the Charlemagne of the illuminated manuscripts, the wise king surrounded by scholars, the father of European civilization, the man the church would eventually call the Great. This was the other Charlemagne, the one the Saxon poets remembered, the one whose name in their language carried a different weight entirely. The Iron King, the man who converted Europe at the point of a sword and called it the work of God. Both were the same man. The Lombards fell next. In northern Italy, the Lombard kingdom had been pressing against the papal territories for decades, threatening Rome, demanding tribute, making the position of the papacy increasingly precarious. Pope Hadrian sent word to Charlemagne in 773. The Frankish army crossed the Alps the following spring, descended into the Italian plain, and laid siege to the Lombard capital of Pavia. The city held for nearly a year. When it fell, Charlemagne did something unexpected. He did not destroy it. He put on the iron crown of the Lombards and added their kingdom to his own. This was the pattern that separated Charlemagne from the chieftains who had come before him. He was not simply a conqueror. He was an architect. Every territory he absorbed was reorganized, administered, connected to the Frankish system of counts and bishops and royal messengers who carried the king's instructions to every corner of a kingdom that was growing too large for any man to personally oversee. He built roads. He standardized weights and measures. He reformed the currency. He ordered that every cathedral school teach reading and mathematics to any boy who could be brought to its doors. He was building something. He was not yet sure what to call it. The answer came from an unexpected direction. In 799, Pope Leo III was attacked in the streets of Rome by a faction of Roman nobles who accused him of corruption and moral failings. He fled north to Charlemagne's court at Paderborn, a pope seeking protection from a king, which in itself said everything about how completely the balance of power in the Western world had shifted. Charlemagne escorted him back to Rome the following year, restored him to his throne, and presided over the council that cleared him of all charges. On Christmas morning, as Charlemagne knelt in prayer at the tomb of St. Peter, Leo placed a crown on his head. The congregation shouted the ancient Roman acclamation 3 times. Emperor. Charlemagne's own account says he was surprised, that he would not have entered the church that morning had he known what the Pope intended. Whether this is true, or the careful diplomacy of a man who wanted the title, but not the appearance of having wanted it, is a question that historians have argued for 12 centuries without resolution. What is certain is that he accepted it. And in accepting it, he created a problem that would outlast his empire by 1,000 years. The crown that Leo placed on Charlemagne's head was not simply an honor. It was a claim, a declaration that the Western Roman Empire had been reborn, that its authority now resided in a Frankish king rather than in Constantinople, where the Eastern Emperor still ruled, and that this rebirth had been accomplished by and for the Christian Church. The Pope had made the emperor, which meant, in the logic of medieval theology, that the Pope stood above the emperor. Charlemagne understood this immediately. He spent the remaining 14 years of his reign making sure it did not become the operating principle of his empire. The tension he created that Christmas morning between sacred and secular authority, between the crown and the church, between the man who held the sword and the man who held the keys, would define European politics for the next 500 years. Emperors and popes would fight over its implications in Italy, in Germany, in the corridors of every royal court in the West. Men would die for it. Kingdoms would fracture over it. The Reformation itself, 7 centuries later, was in some sense a final answer to the question Leo posed by placing that crown on an unsuspecting head in a candlelit basilica. The crown had consequences no one in that room had calculated. Charlemagne died in 814 in his palace at Aachen of pleurisy. He was in his mid-60s, ancient by the standards of an age when most men who survived childhood died in battle or of fever before 50. He had ruled for 46 years. He had fought campaigns in Saxony, Italy, Spain, the Balkans, and the eastern frontier. He had built a kingdom that stretched from the Atlantic to the borders of the Byzantine world, from the North Sea to central Italy. He left it to one son. That son left it to three. And within a generation, the empire Charlemagne had built through 40 years of war began the process of division that would eventually produce the nations of modern Europe, France and Germany and Italy, emerging from the wreckage of a single vision that had lasted, in its unified form, less than a human lifetime. The Saxon forests Charlemagne had burned were already growing back. In the palace at Aachen, which he had built as a conscious echo of Rome and Constantinople, the mosaics are still there. The marble columns he had transported from Italy at enormous expense. The throne room where he received ambassadors from Baghdad and Byzantium, and the edges of a world that was larger than any map he possessed could fully contain. He could read, which was unusual for a king of his time. He never learned to write, which he considered one of the great failures of his life. A man who had reorganized the education of a continent, who had ordered that every child be taught letters, who understood that the pen outlasted the sword, lying awake in his palace trying to form letters that his hand, trained for 40 years to grip a weapon, refused to make correctly. He kept the writing tablets under his pillow, practicing in the dark. The crown he had received on Christmas morning sat in the treasury at Aachen for centuries after his death, passed from emperor to emperor, carried across battlefields, locked in vaults, argued over by men who understood that it represented something larger than any single head it rested on. The idea that Europe could be one thing, that the chaos of the post-Roman world could be ordered again, that a single will, applied with sufficient patience and sufficient violence, could build something that outlasted the man who built it. Charlemagne was wrong about the last part, but the idea itself proved harder to kill than any of his enemies. It is still alive, in the institutions and the borders and the quiet assumptions of a continent that does not always remember where it came from, or what it cost to build.